It is 25 and a half minutes until 2 a.m. Ted Kenworthy has the night off. He'll be back with you tomorrow night. I'm Charlie Dugdale bidding you a good morning, and I have the late news for you from Channel 2. President Ford may be only hours away this Thursday morning from the most crucial legislative defeat of his presidency. The House will try this morning to override Mr. Ford's veto of the tax cut extension bill. And there is increasing speculation that both the House and Senate will vote to override. George Herman has more on that story.
The tax cut extension left the Capitol with no indication of exactly how much support it had. Assistant Clerk Gurney James was carrying a bill passed by voice vote in each House because neither party wanted a test of strength before the President had actually issued his veto. After its arrival, the President came into the White House press room to clear up all doubts and to put on the record one more time the case for a spending limit now.
I have been telling the Congress ever since October that I would veto any tax cut if the Congress failed to cut federal spending at the same time. I must return this bill to Congress, but this does not mean taxes must go up next year. The Congress still has time before Christmas to send me back a tax cut extension for 1976, coupled with a clear commitment to cut the growth of federal spending.
The House will try to override the veto tomorrow. Each side says it thinks it has votes enough to win. That means the outcome is likely to be very close. Actually, the House could have tried to override this afternoon before going to the White House for the congressional ball. But as one Democratic aide put it, it just wouldn't seem right to vote against his bill and then go on down there and drink up his champagne. George Herman, CBS News at the Capitol.
Courtroom drama up in Sacramento. Lynette Squeaky Fromm has become the first person in history ever to be sentenced for attempting to assassinate a U.S. president. A federal judge said there was no precedent to guide him in her sentencing and then declared that Fromm, quote, be imprisoned for the remainder of her natural life, end quote. Murray Fromson has that story from Sacramento.
Miss Fromm did not disappoint those who expected a dramatic outburst from her in the courtroom. U.S. Prosecutor Dwayne Keyes had just asked Judge Thomas McBride to imprison her for life when Miss Fromm turned and threw an apple at Keyes' head. She had apparently hidden it in her handbag. The apple stunned and surprised the prosecutor. It split into several pieces and knocked his eyeglasses to the floor. The judge rejected her attorney's appeal for a new trial. Then he allowed Miss Fromm a final statement before passing sentence. I want Manson out, she declared. I want the world at peace. We only have 10 years of air and water left. I tried to let you all down easy, but you wouldn't listen. Judge McBride, you talk about preserving our resources, but the most precious resource in the world is human life. Had John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King been permitted to live out their lives, he said, they could have done far more than you and Charles Manson to save our society. Miss Fromm repeatedly interrupted the judge. In exasperation, he warned her that he would order her mouth taped and her body tied to a chair unless she remained quiet. As the judge sentenced her to life imprisonment, the 27-year-old defendant sobbed, then cried, holding her hands to her face. I'm convinced, Judge McBride told her, you would have murdered President Ford if you could have. You are beyond rehabilitation. Miss Fromm shouted at the judge, you fool, I'm trying to save your life. Then she was carried, kicking and screaming, from the courtroom by 3 U.S. Marshals. Miss Fromm will not be eligible for parole until 1990. Murray Fromson, CBS News, Sacramento.
A San Diego woman says she and President Kennedy were close friends, and Fidel Castro characterizes the United States as a monster. This and more after a break. Again, the news. The wife of a former Hollywood actor says in San Diego that her friendship with the late President Kennedy was a close personal one. She added that she visited Kennedy at the White House, as she put it, more than 16 or 20 times. Richard Wagner has more on the story from San Diego.
Judith Campbell Exner, an attractive 40-ish brunette, called the news conference to deny that she was a go-between for the Mafia or the CIA with President John Kennedy in connection with plots to assassinate Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. With her husband at her side, she read a statement concerning her relationships with President Kennedy and the reputed mafia leaders.
I can, at this time, emphatically state that my relationship with Jack Kennedy was of a close personal nature and did not involve conspiratorial shenanigans of any kind. I originally met Jack Kennedy in early February 1960 in Las Vegas. We were introduced by a mutual friend. I was introduced to Sam Giancana by the same friend at a party in Miami Beach in late March 1960. I will not at this time reveal the identity of that friend, but will do so when the entire story is told. John Roselli and I were introduced by Sam Giancana sometime after March 1960. Jack Kennedy and I last talked in late 1962.
Mrs. Exner also said she occasionally lunched with President Kennedy in the White House and spoke with him many times on the telephone. She said she never met Jacqueline Kennedy. Asked point blank if she and the president were lovers, Mrs. Exner replied, no comment. She said the full facts of her relationship with John Kennedy are in secure storage and will be released at an undisclosed time in the future. Richard Wagner, CBS News, San Diego.
There's a book in there somewhere. More news. Cuba's Prime Minister Fidel Castro says the United States is Cuba's #1 enemy and is a monster. This in a speech to the opening of the first Communist Party Congress in Havana. Robert Shackney has a report from the Cuban capital, which is subject to some technical difficulties during transmission to our CBS East Coast facilities.
Havana has probably never looked so clean or sparkled so brightly in all the years of the Castro Revolution. Building exteriors have been freshly repainted. Flags are flying or hanging from almost every building. It's all the product of a highly organized campaign for the first Congress of the Communist Party to create the appearance that Cuba is making its system of communism work, that it has become a socialist showcase in the Western Hemisphere. Cuban products were put on display in a special exposition for the Congress. Among other things, consumer goods in short supply a few years ago appeared to be plentiful. Altogether, it's a public image of success and stability. And today, the climax of the occasion, some 3,000 delegates arriving for the first formal gathering of Cuban communists. Cuban government officials are calling the first Congress of the Communist Party of Cuba a transcendent event, the most important development since the Fidel Castro revolution took power almost 17 years ago. The Fidel Castro of this Congress is a correctly and formally uniform public figure. The guerrilla style of other years is absent. Coats and ties have become the rule. Symbolically, to some degree, that suggests the point of this Congress, to mark the change from the freewheeling days of the early Castro government, a government that was radical, unpredictable, and very dependent on the personality of a maximum leader. There is instead to be a more orthodox communist government in Cuba, complete with a constitution for the first time and a 5-year economic plan. Castro personally stresses the point of ideological correctness.
Habían contribuido a divulgar
In the opening session, Castro sharply criticized what he called Yankee imperialism and intervention in Cuba as he reviewed his country's history. He referred, among other things, to CIA assassination plots, the Bay of Pigs. By contrast, he praised Cuba's relations with the Soviet Union. Soviet Communist Party theoretician Mikhail Suslov, heading Moscow's delegation to this conference, was the most visible foreign guest. Another prominent foreign visitor was General Vo Nguyen Giap, North Vietnam's military strategist in the wars against France and the United States. Notable by their absence, the Chinese, who sent no delegation to a Congress in a country siding with Moscow. The Congress is to go on for 6 days, taking up a host of economic, political, and ideological issues. Most important, the message coming from this Congress is that the Cuban Revolution is now an established fact, that whatever happens to Cuba in the future, its government will be Marxist-Leninist, will be communist. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Havana.
I don't know why I apologize for the technical problems. That's the way my TV set sounds at home all the time. Gee, I felt right at home there. It sounds beautiful. Well, it's 14 minutes until 2 a.m. You may need your thermal BVDs. Does anybody remember what BVDs are? Well, anyway, you may need them for today's weather, and nostalgia runs rampant as we see the famed two-engine Gooney Bird again. These stories in 1 minute. Again, the news in sports. In hockey, both the NHL teams from California were beaten last night. The LA Kings dropped a 2-1 decision to Montreal, and the California Seals were thumped 9-2 by Pittsburgh. Gee, I hope that's not prophetic for Saturday night with the Rams. Oy. The injury-ridden Rams will not have running back John Cappelletti against Pittsburgh. He is ill with mononucleosis. Isn't that the kissing disease? Couldn't he give a few minutes out of his love life? Hey. And Arthur Ashe, good news, Arthur Ashe has been named the #1 male tennis player in the U.S. I dig him. He's got a real flair about himself. He's good. The weather. When you consider the alternative, 30 below zero up in the Dakotas. In case you missed that, let me run that by again. 30 below zero in the Dakotas. When you consider that, it really doesn't seem so cold here, but then it's not so warm either. See, the mercury is going to drop to near 40 this morning in Los Angeles. That's 40 above, and rise only to the mid-60s today. And the coastal low fog will be thicker tonight and tomorrow night. And by the way, if you're planning to travel by air out of LAX tomorrow, especially in the early morning, anywhere up to 9:30, 10 o'clock, you might check with the airport before you get down there. Save you wait, who knows. We'll have fair weather in the afternoons. Speaking of aircraft, that sleek jumbo jet with 400 persons aboard at 35 thou had its origins within the memory of a lot of people of World War II vintage. I don't remember it, but it was an airliner that carried about 1/20th the number of passengers at 1/7th the altitude and 1/5 the speed. But boy, was she an airplane. Terry Drinkwater explains.
She was the plane that revolutionized commercial aviation. 24 passengers could fly coast to coast in 20 hours with just 4 stops. The Douglas DC-3, the pride of the airlines in the late 1930s. When World War II came, Rosie and all the other riveters put together more than 10,000 of them. The Army Air Corps' DC-3s were known as C-47s, or more affectionately as Gooney Birds. They flew the hump over the Himalayas to China. It was exactly 40 years ago that the first DC-3 took off from this runway and flew and landed safely. Aviation pioneers commemorated that first flight in Santa Monica. The old-timers who remembered came, and then there were the commemorative flights. One of the nice things about these planes is that the speed is such, only 150 miles an hour, you can actually look out the window and see something. It was a little bumpy at times, and still is, because often the DC-3s can't fly above the weather. Since the DC-3s aren't pressurized, oxygen had to be provided at high altitudes. But she was a luxury in her time, though by today's standards, the piston engines seem so small. Even after 40 years, Nevada Airlines and a few others in the country are still using the durable old DC-3s. Many passengers still like them. There's an intimacy that the big, wide-body jets just can't offer. The rest of the DC-3s are not too gracefully retired in junkyards. In a way, though, they're still serving commercial aviation. Mechanics pirate parts from them to keep the few remaining airworthy DC-3s in service. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Long Beach, California.
Yeah, I remember my first time off the ground ever in an aircraft was in a DC-3 at Tacloban Airport at Leyte. And I want to tell you, when those wings waved at you out there, that was something else. Well, that's the late news from Channel 2. Don't forget Hughes Rudd will be along with the CBS Morning News at 7 o'clock this morning. Ted Kenworthy will be with you for the rest of the week. And, hey, we got a good late show. Cal will be real happy about this. We got The Revolt of Mamie Stover, made back in 1956, with Jane Russell, Richard Egan, Joan Leslie. The story of an opportunistic dance hall girl in Honolulu. Did you get that? In Honolulu, prior to and during the Pearl Harbor attack. Based on a real living character, a gal named Flaming Mamie in Honolulu. True story. I'm sure they glossed over a few things, but stick around for it. It's a pretty good show if you have the time, if you don't have to get up early tomorrow. This is Charlie Dugdale now. It's 8 minutes until 2 a.m., and I'm bidding you a very happy Thursday morning.